Good evening. Welcome to Jewish Green Voices, live from Barnet Shul. I'm Rabbi Samuel Landau, and it's my pleasure to introduce the event. I want to share with you a story. The story begins with a man put in a garden and a lady by his side. Adam and Eve are put into paradise, and they're told to look after it, to guard it. Remember, it's only a leasehold. The freehold belongs to God. How do you remember that? Because everything in this garden is yours. Paradise is yours, except for one small thing, the Eitz Hadas Ben Tov L'Ra, the tree of knowledge between good and evil. Don't eat from there, and then recognize by not eating from there that this is ultimately yours to look after, but not yours to ruin. And what did we do? We paved over paradise and put up a parking lot. We ate from the tree and we separated ourselves from our source. And that separation created a great deal of sadness, the sadness of concrete walls and gases suffocating our society. How do we regain that happiness? Well, in Judaism, there is a pathway to reconnect to nature. We take a fruit, just like there was a fruit in that original story, a pre-Eitz Hadar, a beautiful fruit, the etrog, and we retrace its journey back to source. We take, along with the etrog, a leaf, a date palm, a kapot marim, the next stage back to source. Then we take an anaf eitz avot, literally a thick branch, which we understand is the hadas, is the myrtle. We go from fruit to leaf to branch to tree, and then finally back to arvei nachal, to river willow. We connect back to source, usmachtem lifnei Hashem Elokeichem, and that causes great happiness. That is the experience of Sukkot, where we retrace our steps back to source, to responsibly re-engage with our world, to bring back paradise. I'm delighted tonight to share with you an event that is all about trying to reclaim paradise. I'd like to hand over now to Michelle.
Thank you so much. I am Michelle James. I am one of the co-CEOs of the Jewish Leadership Council, and it is an absolute honor to be here in person with some of you and you online. It's my first in-person event, and it feels like quite a shift. I want to just carry on the song theme. When I've been thinking about how to introduce what we might talk about this evening, I was drawn to a song that I sung lots on camp when I was young, and that was Lo Alecha. Lo Alecha hamlacha ligmor, velo ata ben chorim ligbatel mimena. I won't sing it for you, but this section of Pirkei Avot, it is not your duty to complete the work, but neither are you free to desist from it. I was drawn to, because when we talk about such huge concepts, such huge tasks, sometimes we might be tempted to say, do you know what, I can't. It's too big for me. I can't do it. So I want us this evening, when you are talking and we are listening and we're thinking about what action this might mean, to think about our parts, our individual parts, our community parts, collective responsibility. We will have a chance to hear from our panelists about what action we can take towards the end. But for now, let's just hear from them, introduce themselves, ground us a little in where you are, and we'll have some questions as we go along. And if you've got questions, jot them down, and we'll hear from them at the end. First of all, Talia, it's lovely to see you here this evening. Tell us a bit about yourself. Tell everyone at home a little bit about yourself. What's brought you here today?
My name is Talia. I am the CEO and founder of Sadeh Farm. And what has brought me here today? I guess I love to talk about earth-based Judaism, a Jewish practice rooted in agriculture, rooted in land, which Judaism is. It is an agricultural religion, and it's so amazing that we have these traditions and practices, and we talk a lot about them at the farm, and I talk a lot about them everywhere I go, so I'm excited to talk about that tonight.
And we'll hear more about the farm, which I'm excited to hear as well. Rabbi David.
Thank you, Michelle. So my name is Rabbi David Mason. It's great to be here. Thanks, of course, to the United Synagogue and the Office of Chief Rabbi, and you all at Barnet Synagogue. So great to see so many of you come out in person. And obviously hello to all of you online. So I'm Rabbi at Muswell Hill Synagogue down the road. And I'm also one of the lead rabbis in Eco-Synagogue, which is a really special project, which is growing a network of synagogues and communities across the country to develop plans in their communities to become greener, to become more sustainable, and to lower their emissions. And so as communities, we can show our responsibility, a very deep Jewish responsibility as well, not just to our own and to our own communities, but to the planet in which we live as well. So I'm really excited about that.
Thank you so much. And I think we will come back to those Jewish values. And I'm sure that we will hear that a lot in the things that that you guys are talking about this evening, that you will reflect on. Jonathan, I'll ask you to introduce yourself and place yourself a little, but also to ground us a bit in some of the language so that we have that shared platform understanding of some of the terms that we might be confused by or not clear about as well. So please.
Thank you, Michelle. It was a privilege to have a panel on Mason, Talia, and Michelle. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity. I'm actually wearing my T-shirt. I'm wearing my song on my T-shirt. I don't want to leave it to chance.
Oh, there we go, another song.
It says the answer. Yeah, Rabbi Mason, you didn't have your song taken. The answer is blowing in the wind, and you could say that's my manifesto. If I want to say one thing, then I would say, of course, not only the wind, but also in the sun. But I wanted to quickly just ground some of the key concepts, because this to me is a discussion about climate change. And while we could spend a long time also discussing other key environmental challenges like biodiversity and a closer relationship with nature, I would think this evening we're trying to focus at the moment on climate change. So I want to just give a few basic conceptual points about climate change. Climate change is the fact that the Earth is surrounded by a blanket of the atmosphere contains some very small concentrations of what's called greenhouse gases, and they make the Earth warmer than it would otherwise be in equilibrium. So if you took away all our atmosphere, the Earth would have approximately minus 15 centigrade as an average temperature. That blanket that we have around the Earth keeps it on average around 15 centigrade. Now that makes a big difference. Obviously, it wouldn't be very nice to live on a planet with an average temperature of minus 15, and 15 is very good, and 15 has been the average temperature through all of human civilization. We have, since the Industrial Revolution, been adding tons and tons and tons, gigatons, coming on to teratons of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, which is gradually warming the Earth up. Now, I would recommend to everybody, and I think this is basic literacy in these days, it's not like a nice to have, I think everyone should familiarize themselves with the basic reports, summary to policymakers, from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They're completely available on the internet. The IPCC, they just brought out now AR6, which is Assessment Report 6, and you can find all the basic information as has been compiled by thousands of scientists over the last 6 years since the previous assessment. You can find all the facts, but you will see there, if we don't tackle climate change, it's like the 10 plagues. Our world forever is going to be like the 10 plagues. We're going to deal with so many challenges, we won't know where to look first. Now, the good news is we can stop climate change. It's not too late to stop climate change. We've got plenty of time, but we need to crack on and do it now. So the bad side and the good side, what we need to do is we need to stop adding greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. And basically, in order to keep the climate safe, we need to stop adding greenhouse gases altogether, anything at all, by 2060. And that means for countries like ours, developed countries that have better industrial infrastructure, by 2050. And that's why you hear the phrase net zero by 2050. And that's what we've committed to under the Paris Agreement. And we've now enshrined in law in the UK. So, and once we've stopped, you sometimes read, oh, well, they'll carry on warming afterwards, and science indicates that's not the case. When we stop adding greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, boom, the Earth will stop warming. So that's good news. But it should give us some determination that, I mean, I know it's not every day for most people, but I think about climate change every day. I wake up and I think about climate change. I go to bed and I think about climate change because it is just so important. It's like we're all on this boat together, and it's got holes in it, and we need to fill the leaks. You know, So,
Thank you. I mean, I'm feeling the motivation already. I feel the enthusiasm and the motivation, and it's amazing. Thank you for grounding us. There's two things. I was thrown back to GCSE science and thinking about how much I remembered the diagrams that I had learned, and I think it's really important for us to hold that in our mind, to hold the picture of the earth. Rabbi, you spoke about the earth and how we are entrusted. It is entrusted to us. I think also that's quite big. What we've just heard is quite big. So let's remind ourselves that this is about the pieces that we can do and our contributions, both individually and collectively. Thank you all. The first question I'm going to throw out to you is really to help us to understand a bit more about you. How you define your relationship with the natural world. Jonathan, you just shared a bit of your passion with us. So I'd like for us to hear from you about how you define that relationship with the natural world, and then we'll talk a little bit about your Jewish identity as well. So, Talia, your relationship with the natural world, how's that defined? What does it live, feel, look like for you?
I think it's a super interesting question to ask a human being which is part of the world, what their relationship is with the world. I also want to go back to what the rabbi said about this separation in the story of the Garden of Eden, and I think about that a lot, this idea that we somehow see ourselves as in relationship with the natural world, as opposed to all the world being the natural world and us being a part of it, and this concept that we're somehow different from the world, and so therefore we can pump tons of carbon into the atmosphere, we can trash it, we can watch plants and animal species melt away in front of us, be consigned to the history books in a second because we are not that and that is not us. And to me, that's just a complete misunderstanding of science. Like, of course, we're in the natural fabric of the world. Everything, also carbon is natural. We are part of everything. And I think if we saw ourselves a little bit more as indivisible, also from each other, and from animals and from the clouds in the sky, we maybe would take more care, like we don't chop off our left hand when it's annoying us, you know? Maybe we take more care to think about the surroundings that we're in. Yeah, I mean, it's not my thought, it's a thought rooted in many cultures, ancient cultures.
Thank you so much. Rabbi David.
Yeah, no, fascinating. It's not an easy question, actually, in many ways, because one of the things that often motivates me in relation to climate change is the future effect that will have on people. Now, we'll come to that, but that is something that almost makes me think. I'm not the sort of person, anyone who knows me, who's interested as much in a mystical relationship with nature. For me, what worries me about climate change is how people will be affected. But I think nature you can look at as another way to God, another route to a relationship with God. So the Tanya, the famous work of the Lubavitch, a Jewish group, right? The Lubavitch Hasidim, talk about commandments as almost an expression of God that you clothe yourself in. It's almost like you're hugging God, a fascinating, almost radical idea. And I would almost look at nature as that as well. That by understanding nature and by observing nature and by being interested in it. See, when Adam was in the Garden of Eden, animals were brought to Adam to classify. He was going to say what were their names. And we're told that name was its name. The power was in the hands of Adam to observe, get involved, and to classify nature. And I must say, through lockdown, one of the things that's drawn me is bird life. I was never as interested, and now I have like myriads of feeders in my garden. I can tell you the names of tens of types of birds.
We heard them more, didn't we? It was suddenly, and for me, it was apparent. We heard the birds.
Yeah, they'd always been
traffic.
there.
There wasn't the traffic. Yes, the noise, they had been there, but we didn't hear them before. They weren't so present, so loud.
But for me, it was this desire to understand God's world, to want to know what is that bird? How do we understand? How do we define it? So obviously there's a difference there to climate change, even though we know that, of course, the destruction or the damaging of our climate is going to affect, look at what it's doing to the coral. It's going to affect the amount of diversity and the amount of classification in our hands. So there is a link to them. But I certainly look at, on the one hand, nature as a way to God. On the other hand, it's a way of almost of balancing the busyness of our life. We live incredibly busy and intense lives. And to have nature, to be able to have that merit to go to a wood or a forest. I love Walthamstow wetlands. Walk round them, and it really, really is a really important part of our life.
Thank you so much. Jonathan, connections, relationships with the natural world. How's that defined for you?
I think you're right. I think it's a very important part of who I am as a person. Actually, I haven't really thought about it before, but I love being outside and walking. I think I'm quite, what I would say, quite an anthropocentric view of things, though. I wouldn't say, I think Talia was very eloquent in setting up the physical reality, which is we just are part of nature. But I feel humanity is very separate from, and my concerns around nature are that I love it and I love being it and I find it all inspiring. But I think my own personal emotional connection is I want it to be good to help us, support us. So loss of biodiversity is, I'm a bit instrumental about it. I think it's bad for us. I think it's wrong, but that's how I think I am, really. I think we're beyond being able to, our knowledge is so far beyond anything within the world that we really are quite separate in some ways now. And there's no going back to pastoral sort of life at this point in history, with 7 billion people on the planet. That's not a possibility. But I love what you said, Ted, about us being part of nature. And I like my individual, but it's not very scalable, is what I would say.
I think it's interesting. Do we set ourselves apart from nature? Are we with it? What's the relationship between nature and God, us and God? I think all of these things, hopefully we can continue to weave in. And I suppose I would move on then to, you're clearly all very passionate about this. You are activists. It's a cause that you believe in all of the different ways that you work. And I think we would love to hear a little bit more about how that activism really fits in. We've heard a bit about the Jewish identity from some of you, but how does that activism really play out, fit in to your Jewish identity? The activism, the Jewish identity, is it one of the same? Are they two sides of a coin? And vice versa, the Judaism and your activism. How do they kind of play out for you? Jonathan, we'll go to you first. In reverse order, surprise.
They're one and the same for me. So I like the theme of one of Rabbi Sachs's books, Radical Then, Radical Now. I see Judaism as being deep down very radical. I don't think that's how it plays out now. I think it's actually deeply conservative and it really troubles me. But Judaism, I think, is there to break things, to break the order and create a better world all the time. It's a constant struggle. And I don't like the conservative elements which have kind of taken over.
Thank you. Talia.
Thank you. That is nice to hear. They are one and the same for me too. I guess I learned about climate activism, anything to do with the environment really at all in 2014. I had no concept that there was climate change before that. At a Jewish farm, when I had definitely moved away from my Judaism. And the Jewish farm, it was at the Isabella Friedman Center in America. The fellowship is called Adama. I always recommend it. It showed me that a way to connect to my Judaism was through the land, which is climate justice, which is social justice, really at its core, thinking about the people on the planet and how they can live, and the animals and the plants and everything. And taught me about what climate change was, and I kind of became that activist overnight. I heard about carbon, I heard about the warming up of the planet, I heard about the loss of species, and also the terror that I was afraid, because you start to hear about I was scared. I'm like, and if there's a big drought, there's no food. It's not a joke. It's how it's an existential, it threatens our survival. And it was taught to me in a way that was absolutely framed in Jewish text and in Jewish community, and how actually we can work together to create a world that that is better. We can do that as Jews and as community members. And I was like, yes, of course, I must dedicate myself to this every day. And I wake up and I think about climate change, and I go to sleep and I think about climate change. And the framework of that is my connection to Judaism.
I'm still feeling the motivation. I can't tell you. I don't know if you can feel it, but I can feel it here. Rabbi, tell us, how does this weave together for you?
I feel like I should be getting up and waking and going to sleep thinking about climate. Of course, no. This is. I think something that has come to my mind is that Judaism really builds a bridge between us as people and how we use our world. I think there's a lot of thought needs to go in to how we use and how we actually benefit from our world. So bridges, like blessings, is the idea that you can actually benefit from the world, but you need to reflect in a spiritual manner when you do that. So you're not meant to take from the world without the blessing. I could put it in my mouth and I could benefit, of course. I haven't said a blessing. Have I stolen? Well, I don't know if I've really literally, legally stolen, but I haven't made that connection. And Chief Rabbi last week mentioned, it's something I've written about as well, which is in the biblical story, when we're told that Adam was placed in the Garden of Eden, le'ovda u'leshomra, to work the land, to work the garden, and to keep it, to preserve it. And I think the oved we do well, we extract. Right? We live in an era, a period of time, where we are continually able, in increased manner because of technology, to take from our world. Whether it's meat and livestock, which means larger land, whether it's overfishing, whether it's the fuels in our underneath the ground, we're able to extract more. And I think what's happening is that the ability to extract is outpacing our ability to preserve. And I think there is an interesting thing about our balance. In other words, on the one hand, we need to clearly reduce carbon emissions. We need to get to zero. It needs to be something we all think about. How can we, both in our lives and in our communal lives, go to net zero? But I also think we need to consider changes that need to be made over time in our lives, in all areas. So, for instance, meat consumption. We might need to be eating less meat. We love our meat. Hopefully, technology will bring plant cell-based meat onto the horizon, and maybe that will help us. I don't know. So I think for me, it's right there in the story of the creation that we're meant to balance what we take from the world with how we preserve and sustain our world for the future.
Thank you so much. I'm quite a visual learner. I see pictures when I hear things, and I'm imagining the scales, I'm imagining the steps on a journey. There's a big change piece, and Jonathan, I know tech is important for you as well, and thinking through tech specifically. I'm going to throw the big question out there now, because I think you will probably have varied responses, and I kind of encourage you to respond to each other at this point as well. Don't be polite, we don't need to be. But I'm going to throw the big question out there that I think probably many of you will want to hear, which is, what do you really think are some of the steps that we as individuals, as a community, could be taking to become more environmentally friendly, to really address this issue of climate change, to really to strike that balance of the give and the take, and to make the scales that little bit more balanced? And maybe balanced isn't about balance, and actually it's about tipping them before they become balanced. So what are the things we should be doing to really achieve this?
Could I add one thing to what Tanya said before?
Absolutely.
About the connection to Judaism? So I've actually found it quite hard, I would say, that Orthodox Jewish communities haven't been dealing with climate change. It's been very challenging for my own practice. And I've been inspired, like the Chief Rabbi has picked this up as an important topic. Personally, I can see that he finds it deeply engaging, and I can see that he sees it's important for our community as well. So I'd just like to say it's been, I mean, honestly, it troubles me that in yeshiva, boys don't study anything about the environment or climate change, and they study all day. They study, you know, I have nephews, I went to yeshiva, they don't learn anything about the environment. And I don't understand how in this day and age you wouldn't try and apply your learning, have it only backward looking, not be forward looking. So I've been struggling a bit with this, and I'm very pleased that we have many more events like this. It means a lot to me personally, and it strengthens my own faith. So.
I'm so glad that you've said it, and thank you, because I know that for the United Synagogue, for the Office of the Chief Rabbi, that it's very important to be putting this on the agenda. And I think actually when we were talking earlier, we talked about how just talking about these things is important, starting to have a shared language, starting to say conversations and turning these conversations into conversations for action. So actually maybe the first thing that we need to do is to have these conversations. I'll put that on the table. Rabbi David, you look poised to say something.
No, I think that's just really a very, very important discussion. I think conversations, are being had. I can tell you from my experience in eco-synagogue that there are, we have now 40 synagogues who are registered, and there are many United Synagogue communities that are engaging. We have members of Barnet here who are very engaged in having conversations. And I think that's really important, that there's a lot of positivity. Yeshiva is something, maybe outside our remit here, but in the United Synagogue, in our communities, I know from mine, I think for me, it's getting across the board awareness. It's trying to weave in, we can't solve this on our own. Governments need to do a lot of work here, and there's a lot of grassroots stuff. We can't do this on our own, but we are responsible. We should be leading in many ways, as a Jewish community. And I think, therefore, to create awareness across the board, from the teaching and the education in the community, from the management of the community, from the way building is done. Right, we're doing a new build now in our community in Muswell Hill, which is great. And I've been encouraging, along with other members, that we think sustainable in terms of the type of equipment we buy in, whether we can put a heat pump in there, whether we understand the nature of our emissions, can measure them. We're going to have electric boards like you, of course, have had for ages in Barnet, and I'd love to see on the digital board, every month, our carbon emission, and be able to say, have we reduced our emission in our community? I think those are tangible, they're doable, and we've got the networks that are growing to do them. I really believe that. Amazing.
So I think we're hearing, talking, learning, understanding, questioning, planning, purposeful choices. And also there's a piece about accountability there. We are going to do this. How are we measuring that? Who are we accountable to? Talia.
I just want to reflect on what you said, Jonathan, because it feels super emotional for me to hear you speak like that. It's when I came back from Adama in 2014, and I was like, yes, America has this down. This is a Jewish issue. This is a world issue. Obviously, we are all going to take it forward. And I went home to my home community, and I was like, yeah, an Orthodox community, like climate change. Obviously, Judaism has a history of radical activism. I'm from a long line of people standing in the streets demanding what's right for the sake. And everyone was like, what are you talking about? And I literally had to start Sadeh so that I could find a few other like-minded people to talk to, so I didn't think I was going crazy for years. And I'm so glad also that the Chief Rabbi he came to Sadeh with you, Rabbi Mason, and he did, it is important to him, but yeah, like 2014 to 2021 was difficult and frustrating, and I am excited that we're talking about steps forward, but I think we should just acknowledge it so that we can be like, actually, we had a few years, and now we need to be like, okay, like we need to move 1,000 times faster than if we actually, yeah. It's just nice to hear from somebody else like I did.
I really would echo that, and I think it's great to hear. And I suppose I would ask as well, it feels like it's maybe you've tried to have that voice, to find that space. Do you feel now that it's received, that people are listening? Has it been hard to find your voice? Are you there yet? Is there still a way to go with it? What could we do to hear more, or to create more space for those voices? Are you being heard enough, I suppose I'm asking? Any of you?
I would like to say that people are definitely listening more. Thank you.
Right.
And also, like, the whole world is changing, right? Mm-hmm. Like, suddenly everybody knows what COP is. It's COP26. There's 26 COPs before this. To not know what that is, I think that's in part due to big protest movements that may or may not be controversial, and just the reports coming out, the IPCC reports coming out, and scientists gathering around, and I don't know, some like better PR for science. Definitely the world seems to have moved on and the world is listening more, which is great. And also like the time for awareness raising was 10 years ago. So it's like, now is the time for action. And I still get a lot, don't push people too hard to do action. Don't tell them, oh, you don't want to be too prescriptive about it. People are scared. And I'm like, yes. And also let's do stuff. Let's move forward. I'm always like, come to Sadeh, I won't pitch the thing, but then you can chat about it. Then you can chat about it. Yes.
Amazing.
Yes.
I think there's different approaches here. I think there's definitely different approaches. There's certainly different layers. So that you've got, on the one hand, you've got the government and what it needs to do. You've got people on the ground, people in their homes, the average individual. And you've also got a role for activism, clearly. I think that's the right to push people to censor. I think it's important that all of those work together. Not everyone is going to be an activist. People may well be put off. I know many that are put off by activism, as we experienced recently on the streets of London. People are put off by that. That might push people further away. But not everyone will be also part of government and what it does. So I think it's important that we can keep those, in a sense, pumping forward together. We all have to be in this together.
Go for it.
Sorry, can I just say also that, yes, and also to remember that this movement didn't come out of anywhere, and there have been people fighting this fight for decades. And it's important to say that I've met some amazing people who've been banging their head against a brick wall basically their whole lives. And there have been many movements well before I was alive, like looking at this and dealing with this. And I feel lucky that people are listening now, and I don't know how it must have been like for them.
I think that's important to hear, and actually change is difficult sometimes. Cultural change within a community globally is hard. Sometimes it takes time to listen, to understand, and I think I'm glad to hear that you feel heard and listened to, and that there are platforms. And I think you're right, COP26 isn't just a random number. There have been 26. It's taken 26 for it to be noticed so much. What will it be like, at 50? Where will we be? Will we need at 50, or will we have reached a point at which actually it's not that prevalent, and we've kind of reached this net zero point? But I suppose thinking about COP6, thinking about what we might be able to do, there's a lot of, Jonathan, you spoke about, these are the targets and these are set from government, and this is, are they realistic? Do we feel like, you talked a bit about what we would have to do to get there. It feels quite a long way away, though. It feels like quite hard to reach. It's this exilier in the future of 2050 for me feels like a decade away, more than a decade away because it's 2021. But it feels like a long time. It's COVID. Forgive me. My timeline is totally gone. But what about those incremental things that we might do? What does it feel like to us? What's the changes that we could make? The things that you want to see?
So this year I got an EV and I installed an air source heat pump at home to replace my gas boiler. Those are the things that everyone will need to do. Yeah, so I've just gone and did them, to be honest with you. Yeah. Now, you might ask me, I'm sure you're going to ask me, why are those important things?
Why are they important things?
Thank you.
I'll ask a different question.
Go for it.
Could the average person afford them?
That's a good one. Why are they important? And then let's talk about affordability and the reality of it. Yeah.
They're important because what I said before is we need to completely eliminate carbon emissions. So a Toyota Prius, which is a hybrid car, and a very popular and good car, I'm sure, reduces your emissions from your tailpipe by 50%. But that's as far as you can go with a hybrid design. An electric car, and I would describe myself as part of the Electrify Everything movement, as you can see. An electric car issues no emissions at all at the tailpipe. And the electricity, in theory, can be generated entirely from clean sources. which themselves emit zero emissions. And wind farms and solar farms and nuclear plants do exactly that. So the pathway is electrify everything and make the electricity clean. That's the route to net zero. And I included that, so you may go, well, yes, but what are the embodied emissions in the manufacturing of the car? And I'll tell you, everything has to be electrified and all the electricity has to be zero carbon. So when you're manufacturing a car, I'm sure many manufacturers are already looking at this, every component is going to have to be fired. Every factory is going to be clean electricity. Every mining vehicle is going to be electric or hydrogen fuel cell, probably electric. Everything all the way down is going to be electric, and all the electricity is going to be clean electricity. That's the way to tackle climate change. Now, there's a midrash, which is, I think, Midrash Rabbi Vayikra, and which the chief rabbi, I heard the chief rabbi say, but it's quite well known midrash, that Hashem creates the medicine before he creates the disease. What's the right expression? Makdim Trufa L'Makah. And he says it in relation to going down to Egypt. Before we went down to Egypt, which was a blow to us, Hashem created the redemption, the seeds of the redemption. It's a concept. We're very fortunate because we have this plague, which is climate change. Hopefully won't be a plague, but impending. At the same time, we are very fortunate that many countries have been investing in the technologies that allow us to prevent climate change. And the key technologies are solar panels and wind turbines and batteries. Those are the key technologies. They're not all of the piece of the puzzle, but they're a very large part. And it's hard to imagine the scale at which we need to do this. Every single car needs to be changed. Every single boiler needs to be changed by 2035 in this country to meet net zero. Every gas power plant has to be closed. Every coal plant has to be closed. All we can have is clean energy by 2035 and electric vehicles and electric heating. Everything has to go, 14 years. So you say it seems remote, but that's a huge rate of changing infrastructure in this country. It's very close. And I think in 2010, I was like, oh, we've got loads of time. In 2021, I'm like, actually,
Not long.
it's not long, and we need to be cracking on with it now. The government announced a number of important papers today. But electrify everything is an incredibly demanding schedule. And it's what we need to do. There is no other plausible route to tackle climate change, but we still have time to do it. And we must do it. And until people grasp that we have this enormity of a problem, unless we do this, it's honestly like the Second World War. The only thing you can really compare it to is the industrialization that was required to build the number of Spitfires and Lancaster bombers and everything, the Manhattan Project that we did. It's much more like that than it is just a gradual change.
So that feels quite big again. We've kind of gone little, and now that's really massive, and it's huge, and it's not long. And I think actually your question is really important. I was in a discussion yesterday, a communal discussion yesterday, and it was about affordability of things and what does that mean. And actually, electric vehicles are not cheap. Solar panels are not cheap. I heard on the news, actually the new boilers, the grants, it's such a limited number that it will provide. How do we start to make that change where for some people, we're just about affording the bills that we have now, let alone the investment?
The rabbi should say, whoever can afford it must do this. That's the end of it. It's an avera to be still burning gas if you can afford to change. That's my opinion on the matter.
Rabbi, how about you?
I'm not sure I'm that rabbi, but you might have another rabbi. I'm not that
I'm
rabbi.
not rabbi.
I think there's lots of issues of social justice involved in climate change.
That's true, but we have many able to pay members.
No. What I was going to say was that obviously social justice is a future issue. For instance, in a global sense, if we don't control the rate of emissions, if we don't protect our climate, there will be a larger stream of refugees because of uninhabitable areas of our world. So justice is very much a part of climate change. But also in terms of, yes, our members, that's a very good point, because our members, thank God, we have many members who will be able to. But even then, to put a heat pump in, it really is expensive. You talk about a few thousand, if there aren't grants, the grants that are now coming out are few, it's going to be hard. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't say we've got to get on with it. My take on it is that there is always something we can do. There's always something we can do. In this room here, the number of times I go into my synagogue and the lights are on. I don't know if you have that, right? You come into shul and the lights are on, right? Or the heating's on. I'm sure not a barnet.
Home, upstairs, children.
I'm sure not a barnet. I'm sure not.
No.
But
Yeah,
not,
but let's use that safely.
So
The lights now use very little energy. Switching the lights off saves very little energy. That bulb is 5 watts. In the old days when a bulb was 70 watts or 100 watts, sure, switch it off. You could leave it on 24/7. It's not a big deal. We have to, if everyone does a little, we'll achieve a little. And we have a lot to do. So I really think we need to, don't give me your paper straws. Just don't give me your paper straws. I'm not interested. Because it's not, we have a global crisis impending. We have to raise our ambition dramatically.
Yeah, I think there's a difference, obviously.
No, there's too much talking about the little stuff.
Yeah.
There really is. That's how I feel about it. And factually speaking, I'm correct. I understand emotionally, we don't want to make big asks of people.
I think the emotion's important though, because let's think about actually if we're feeling frustrated that our voices haven't been heard, there's got to be entry points. So actually the emotional connection, the little things, people feeling like it's a journey as well. Let's remind ourselves, we can't all jump in. I can't afford to buy an electric vehicle. We can't all jump in. I hear what you're saying. Big is important. But also let's remind ourselves that it's a journey people are on. The persuasive nature of actually raising this as a topic is important. I can see some hands. I'm just going to give everyone a chance to respond if they want, and I'm definitely going to come to questions because I can feel the energy already. So, Talia, is there anything you wanted to say on this? Anything else, Rabbi David, that you wanted to say just on the kind of small steps, big steps? What's good, bad, ugly about it?
I think it's clear that the fact that we're bringing the urgency of this to the community, to a community, to the wider United Synagogue world and beyond, and that we are thinking now as people, as Jewish people, about what we can do. There's obviously discussions about what that is and how we do it and how communities do it, but the urgency is something we're thinking a lot, and I think we all agree with that, and that's really good, really important.
Anything before questions?
Yeah, I agree in that I'm glad that we're talking about it in an urgent sense. And I completely agree that talking about tiny things makes us feel better and maybe not actually, and sidetracks us from doing the things that actually make a difference, which if anything can be more harming because you might be like, well, I can do this thing because I do recycling or whatever. And I find that frustrating. I found that frustrating for years. I'm still finding that frustrating. And it is a massive question. It is not a small question about who can afford what. And also, if you have money, you should be spending it on things that save the planet. Amazing. If you have the money.
If you have the money. So I will take a couple of questions, give you an opportunity to respond. So I can see a couple of hands. We've got a microphone so we can see. Let's have both questions and then we'll see if they totally contradict, complement. Let's see.
Good evening, Natalie Shaw. I'm a member of Barnet Synagogue and I was actively involved in the United Synagogue drive for eco-synagogue. So as you can see, I'm slightly biased in my thoughts on this. But what I'd like to understand, Rabbi Mason, is how we can actually get the best in to understand that Jewish law should also be environmentally sound. And perhaps, for example, when we give a product a hechsher, perhaps we should also be taking into consideration how that product is actually environmentally produced and in terms of the supply chain involved in that product. Because it seems to me there are a lot of products that are marketed as being kosher, which actually perhaps have not been produced in as ethically a way as they could be, because considerations are not necessarily environmental. And is it true to say that Talmudic law was an interpretation of the Torah and how we should live our lives? And if so, should we not have new Talmudic law which reflects the changing environment in which we live?
Wow, I mean, that's a big one. We're going to hold that, definitely. What does that mean, the hechsher? Let's have the second question as well, and then we'll see how we can respond.
David Shaw, I'm actually husband. Question from the same household. My wife took me to Shane's, and my question is simple, really. For a long time, I've been making noises about the way that aluminium are supplied. It used to be, many years ago, they would come in a cardboard box for the petrol and the love would be, again, equally in a cardboard box. These days, for many years, it's been in a plastic cover, which is somewhat ironic, for the love. I've campaigned against it. I've tried to speak to the supplier short about it and so on and so forth. Just keep hitting brick walls over and over again. I phoned up the best thing I spoke to Rabbi Conway. He didn't have a clue what I was talking about. He thought I might be speaking Malta. Is there any approach that the eco-synagogue could take, make the Chief Rabbi's office understand this? Because it's clearly not sustainable. It's clearly, ironically,
I think we hear you. I think there's two really good questions. And I think the first one really is about what's the value that we put on understanding the impact, and what are we saying about how we value that in our community, what are the measures that we take, and also how do we really bring about that change? How do we say this is important? We all listen. We want, how do we have that kind of majority, the critical mass to make a change? So there's a couple of really big questions there. They were definitely put to you in the first instance, so I'm going to hand to you and then we'll see.
Listen, I feel it's honoured, or the responsibility of being a rabbi that gets these questions, and obviously can reflect them on. Obviously, in terms of the Bet Din, they will, I'm sure, be willing to talk to you. I'm not, as you know, one of the Dayanim of the Bet Din, so I'm not going to be able to answer directly. At the same time, I think if we can start having these conversations, and they always start as conversations, that's the way things are, and then you ideally move towards a greater awareness. Given that the United Synagogue, given that the Chief Rabbi's office are looking strategically and thinking around climate, around emissions, around these issues, that I would assume would extend to think around these things as well. So, we're really happy with the kashrut services that we get as a community. That's grown exponentially. That's great. I think you've got a very good point. I can't answer the question directly because obviously I'm not party to the Bet Din. I think we would need to bring that up. So it's something that within eco-synagogue, I'm there, we can think about and take that on. So I think, great. New Talmud, I'd have to give an hour shira. That one. New Talmud. Talmud is always, it said, something that has to be related to within the age we live in. I'm not sure New Talmud is where I go necessarily, but I think that these seeds, John has been bringing that out from text. The seeds are there. The wisdom is there. But remember, we're talking about, really pikuach nefesh here. We're talking about life. At the end of the day, this is really a very universal sense of responsibility. Wherever we are, however well we do or not, our world is threatened. Germany, down the road, wealthy Germany suffered, seriously, death, right, from the...
200 people were killed.
Right. So this isn't happening in some island in whatever. And if it was happening in an island where we should also, by the way, be worried. But no, it's happening, and it can happen, the climate and weather is changing in our country. So I think this is pikuach nefesh. This is serious. And obviously the conversations need to deepen. So I appreciate that. Arba minim, absolutely.
Just for the benefit of those online.
So the question has been put
Excellent.
that the 4 species that are taken on Sukkot will come in a plastic holder. We love that plastic holder. The problem with this is very unsustainable. The cardboard holder, bit more cumbersome, much better, much greener, much more sustainable. Can we go back, if anyone's listening, to the cardboard one?
Yes.
What I would say though in our synagogue, I don't know, this would sound like an okay situation, is that we just got our members to give us their plastic ones and we'll use them again next year. They're not going anywhere. I've got a place in Shul. It was not me that did it. It was a member of my synagogue who asked exactly the same question. And I took mine for our kids and myself. And we've got one place. They're going to be there for a year and we will use them next year. And we will ask not for the plastic containers next year because we've got plenty of them, thank you very much. So I think that's possibly a way forward. But it's quite right that we ask these questions.
Go for it.
Activism 101, yes. Thank you so much for spending your time asking the authority to change their ways, because that is the way forward. That is a huge step in the right direction in tackling climate change. And that is really what we should all be doing. And it makes me feel excited and proud to be part of this community, to hear that you're doing that. So thank you.
Fabulous, thank you so much. I think it is important. These are the conversations, actually raising awareness, putting your hand up and saying, this is important to me, making change, even small changes, although not as impactful as the big ones in the first instance, are important. We have another question from the audience, in the front and in the back. We'll take both and see where we land. In fact, we've got three, so we'll take three. 1, 2, 3, go for it.
Right, Tony Cohen, surprise from Barnet Synagogue.
Yay!
Firstly, a slight disagreement I have. Telling people not to switch things off, I think, is probably not the wisest thing, because it's cumulative. If everybody switches something off, the cumulative effect is enormous. You're quite right. If we left the lights on here on its own, it wouldn't make much difference. But if every United Synagogue made sure that things are switched off, then sure, it will make a huge difference. So that's just a comment. I've got a question about electric vehicles. And the question is, I mean, the government made a move today to incentivise electric vehicles. And there's a bit of a penalty for the manufacturers. But what could we do to really incentivise the government to say, no, we're not going to have, we said 10 years' time, let's make it 3 years' time. How can we incentivise the government to say, actually, there's only 3 years, combustion engines gone. And by the way, there's this massive incentive for you to change your combustion engine to EV. What can we do to do that? I think that will make a huge, huge difference.
Thank you so much. For the benefit of those at home, we had the what can we really do to push government to bring those deadlines forward even more around electric vehicles, not 10 but 3 years. So what can we really do to make that change? At the back, go for it.
Thank you, Russell Eisen, again, a Barnet member. Just to give on the point of what we can do on an individual basis. I think in 2018 there was a report that said tourism accounts for 8% of worldwide carbon emissions. Is a policy of carbon offset sufficient, or should we simply all stop travelling, for example, to Israel?
Excellent question, thank you. We also had one at the front, so while we get the microphone here, the question was, is carbon offsetting enough, or should we just stop travelling?
Hi, I'm Jeremy Russ, member of Barnet Synagogue and member of Green. So we should all see it's like written on our streets, on the roads actually, in fact. I'm someone, I'm an interior designer, so I try and talk to my company about specifying sustainable materials and the way we build things. But I'm also trying to take action at home by insulating my parents' block. So I kind of got fed up of, I mean, talking is great and it's very important, but mobilising ourselves to actually just get our hands dirty and as come together as a community, build skills, learn things from people in the trade. There's plenty of us in the trade, you know a lot of things, and really tell you that what you set up is fantastic. Or someone who got their hands dirty and said, come on, let's build this farm, let's educate people. So I feel like people who live on the streets, people who don't have skills in trying to mobilise tasks for, is it a good idea to mobilise task forces to get people to start doing it? Never mind waiting for the government. It's just, you know, in a way, taking it into our own hands. I don't know what you think about that.
Thank you so much. For the benefit of those at home, what do we do? Do we take it into our own hands? Do we mobilise task force? How do we do this? Get our hands dirty and actually get into it ourselves. So there's three big things there: electric vehicles, carbon offsetting, and just getting stuck in. Any thoughts?
Yes, on all three questions.
Excellent. Excellent. Go for
And
it.
I heard the answer.
Yes.
Yes, I've heard the question to people listen. So on cars, 2030 is already a very ambitious date in my view, and I've followed this quite closely. It was initially 2040, if you remember, and then the government signalled under grant chapters maybe they could do 2035. and now we're looking at phasing all new petrol cars out by 2030 in this country. That's such a strong signal to manufacturers, to be honest with you, that it's gained a momentum of its own. So VW won't be developing any more petrol cars or diesel cars. They'll only be developing EVs. So will Volvo. Every manufacturer in the world is pivoting entirely to electric every now, apart from Toyota, who messed up. But there you go. So I think 2030 is super ambitious. There's a lot of plants building cars around the world. We have 25 million cars on the roads in the UK. I forget the figure globally, but it's a big number. And so it needs to be fast, but there are limits to how fast we can do it. There's a lot of batteries to build. We currently make, I think, about 100 gigawatt hours of batteries a year. We probably need to scale that by a factor of 100 by 2030. So it's a lot to do. And we need to, but the targets are absolutely central in giving manufacturers the confidence to make the investments and pivot their strategy. So that's on the cars point. On the travel thing, that's, I'm afraid, fake news. 80% of carbon emissions don't come from tourism. I would be surprised if it's more than 10%, and my guess is it will be about 5%. From aviation, it's about 3%. So it's a substantial fraction, and it's not fairly shared amongst the world population. A very small fraction of the world even step on a plane. So there's a social justice question, and electrifying or making aviation clean is one of the harder technology challenges that we face. It's doable, but there's a lot of research to get there. My own feeling is it's not the highest priority. We need to give the manufacturers clear signals that that's the direction of travel, so they can work on sustainable aviation fuel, electric planes, whichever fuel cells, whichever technology they determine after trials works the best. Carbon offsetting is a scam. You heard it here first. It's just an error. Everyone should be responsible for their own emissions and eliminate them or deal with them. Offsetting is just an accounting entry for moving stuff around. The only exception I would make to that is if you're paying for someone to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, what's called direct air capture, that's a very valuable service. And not only that, if you pay for that, you're paying to scale a technology which will definitely be needed to achieve net zero by 2050. And the last thing was about Insulate Britain and insulation. That's fantastic, to be honest with you. My view is that every plumber, every builder is a climate warrior. All that work now needs to be done in a way which is consistent with making our houses better insulated, making them zero carbon. It's probably the hardest task that we face as a country to get to net zero, and it's gnarly. It's everyone's home. It affects everybody. And it's brilliant that insulation is so key. Insulation is central. Electrifying heat is central. Everyone has the opportunity to do that in their own homes. It's the most impactful thing that you can do to tackle climate change, is make your home insulated and electric heating. So
thank you so much. I think I'm hearing targets and I'm hearing accountability, really. And I think that's our individual, that's our collective, that's our governmental accountability for things.
I just think the only thing that's an interesting discussion, which is not necessarily for now, but is also about whether, again, obviously there's a reliance on there being technology.
Yes.
And that's a big thing. I know of course, the question is being ready for the situation where we don't have the technology, where we don't have the carbon capture ability. And so in the case of aviation, I mean, yeah, that won't mean not going to Israel. People need to travel. You've got family. You need to go see family. I don't think that's right, but it might mean, yeah, look, hey, post-COVID, does one need to go to that conference, or or can it be online? Does one need to go to Copenhagen? Can it be done not? So there is that.
Can you holiday in Kent, for example?
On a farm, maybe. On a farm.
Sounds inspirational to me.
I can't afford.
In the interest of the fact that this is we're coming to the pictures. This is a hybrid event, so I really would love to give. We've got a couple of questions from online, so I'd love to give that opportunity. We'll hear those, and then we've got the kind of 2 minutes of what's the action that we can take. What are the things that you're involved in that we can give to everyone to be inspired? So online questions are.
This is a question from Deborah and Robert. Good evening. How can we solve the climate change issue without drawing attention to ourselves like the M25 motorway protesters have? And the second question, I prefer picking up litter on a Saturday morning than standing in shul. At what point does the Jewish religion recognise the real importance of the climate crisis? At what point does doing something proactive for our climate, biodiversity, become more important than spending time in shul? If we are the chosen people, surely we should be leading the way in activities to protect the very planet we've been given. Surely that is more important and recognisable by Hashem than some other activities. That question was from Asher.
So nice, easy ones to finish up. I'll just throw it over to you guys. Any thoughts, responses? Yeah.
However you look at it, it's rabbinical.
It's quite
Well, there was a
rabbinical.
first question on M25, wasn't
The
there?
M25 is definitely a rabbinical issue.
Yeah,
So.
for sure.
Come on, Rabbi Mason.
I was telling to you, Talia, for that one.
I have an answer for the second question.
Oh, I was going to take the second one.
I know you're more
You can
relevant to
take
you with the
whichever
shul.
questions you want. The answer should move you, so go for it.
As someone, who doesn't spend a lot of time in shul, I think I miss it, and I think that actually spending time in prayer, whether that's meditation or we try and definitely include lots of blessings every day at Sadeh. There's so many awesome Jewish blessings that we have in our traditions, and we do them a lot at Sadeh because actually spending time in prayer, meditation, and blessings and thinking, I think, for me at least, gives me a sense of hope, of optimism in the face of these difficulties. It pushes me further. When I wake up on Sunday morning, I'm more excited to get involved. It's time for myself. It's time to commune with the world around me and think about the divine. And I think it's so important. If you want to be an activist, if you want to be working on the environment, you need rest. You need R&R. And I love to find that time in prayer.
Thank you.
Very nice. Very nice. Very nice. You know
Round of applause.
It's like the Paul Hollywood handshake.
Absolutely. No handshaking.
When I was a kid, I used to want to go and sit by my friends and talk in shul on Shabbos morning, I should admit. And my dad didn't let me. Sorry, my dad's on. My dad was a scientist, by the way, I should add, a very good, expert microbiologist. And I wasn't allowed to. And I used to say, Dad, it's called a Beit Knesset. It's the good old famous one. You probably know, right? It's a house of gathering. You gather to talk. Now, of course, the idea is you gather to pray, absolutely. But it is still a Knesset. It's still a gathering. And so I think we need those gatherings. At the moment, the gathering, the ultimate gathering for a community, especially moving on from this terrible pandemic, is Shabbat morning. For many communities across the communities, Shabbat morning is going to be really important. And that is, to me, a great opportunity for a rabbi and for members to talk about these issues, to give the sermon, to bring in the speaker. You can do it in your communities. We've got Eco Shabbat right coming up. It's a great opportunity to bring people in and have the conversation, right? You can't clone Johnny Waxman, but even though we loved it. If you can make sure the technology does that as well, then you can have Johnny telling your communities that, yes, we should be not sleeping because of this. So I'd say, we need to pray for our world. And yes, we need to ensure that in our week, we are thinking actively about what we can do. It's hard. It really is hard. We've got to avoid we've got to avoid the tendency to judge people. Everyone is at a different place, right? And what we cannot do is do that. Well, hold on, how much have you spent this week doing the environment? Because everyone is trying, and we can work with people, and we can get there when we take our communities and we take people with us. And so, definitely I would vote for, as you might be surprised, as a rabbi, keeping shul on a Shabbat morning.
Thank you so much. I would expect nothing less. It's very important. I think the first question that was quite difficult probably, because I would really throw it back and frame it as, I think the question was, how do we do this quietly? How do we do this without drawing attention like we have seen? And I would probably say, should we be doing this quietly? I don't know. How did you feel when you heard that? How do we do this without making noise? Or how do we do this? Which way works? Is it the slow and steady and quiet and under the radar, or should we be shouting? Go for it.
I think the sadness of the gluing to the bridge or whatever, or the sadness for me of blocking the road, is it almost takes the platform for activism. And I think that we each have to have, and I say this I will be clear, in a non-partisan manner, we each need a political voice, right? If there's a demonstration which is not activist in the nature of XR, let's say, in the way we worry about, we could be part of that. Writing letters, engaging our members of parliament, pushing government, whichever government.
Calling the vet in.
Calling the vet in.
Yeah, be in touch, be in touch. So I think, I think our voice is really important, I think, absolutely.
I would love to, I'm so conscious of questions. I can't not let a young person in the audience ask a question. We're about to do our pitch, but you are about to ask a question. Let's go for it. That's all
On the
right.
topic of activism, I was wondering what you thought about school strikes and if that could help, if that's helpful in any way, yeah.
Excellent question. School strikes, are they helpful? Activism.
I mean, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Schul strike.
Yes. I definitely heard school strikes, not
You
school
did.
strikes.
I was like,
Schul,
this
Schul.
thing, Schul strike.
School strikes
I have
gives me
thought about sitting
optimism.
outside Schul with a Schul strike for a clean out.
Oh my God.
That was just such a great, just a joke. It's for Purim, maybe.
So Talia, you're saying yes to school strikes.
I'm saying yes to
You're
school
saying yes to school
strike.
strikes.
My kids. God.
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I think whether we're not here to develop the policy of school strike. I think you cannot but admire the work that Greta Thunberg has done and the movement. You cannot but admire it. So yeah, absolutely.
And unfortunately, it's the same with Extinction Rebellion. They move the window of discussion. They just do. We can hate them. We can say, oh, it's so unreasonable and they're blocking ambulances. But they move the conversation on.
Not sure.
They move
Not
the
sure.
conversation on. They do. There's no doubt about it.
We're just going to pause
Better
there.
Beg
We're
to
going to
differ.
pause
Sorry,
there.
there is some
That's
doubt
all right.
about it.
That's all right. I think it's a great question. Thank
Good
you.
question.
Let us know the progress of the school strikes, please, as well, because we want to know. We want to know. We want to see it. This is the moment for us to say to you, when I was invited to do this, I said, what do we really want? What's the takeaway? We've got to have something. It's an event. Sorry, there's no food to take away, but what's the takeaway? What are you guys taking away? And actually, I want you now to say to these people here and these people here, what can be done? What's next? What are you involved in that you can say, come join me in this? Talia.
Come to Sadeh and then you can have a lot of these conversations with me, but also today we picked apples, threshed wheat, and then harvested loads of beautiful seeds from the Havdalah garden. That is the kind of thing you'll be doing. And we have our guest house, obviously, which is kosher, that you can stay at. But more than that, I want to, which I was talking to you about before,
Yes.
which is we run a fellowship program. It's a 3-month, very immersive program for Jewish adults. You live at Sadeh, you live in community, we eat together, we work the land together, everything, we look after the chickens together, everything is together, and we learn about Jewish agriculture, we learn about the science behind climate change, we learn a lot of different things, and it's really based on the program that I did, which totally transformed my life, Adama. But we need funding for it. Yes, the Jewish community, we are having these conversations, we are talking about these things, but where's the funding in Jewish environmental action? We should be the leaders, we should be at the front, and this program is creating the next Jewish environmental leaders, and we need funding for it. So that is my answer.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Thank you. I would say, as the Great Barnet Synagogue has done, register your community. Get your community to join Eco Synagogue. Because through Eco Synagogue and its audit of how you are, your environmental audit, you can improve so much how your community is. And for me, the vision through Eco Synagogue here for a United Synagogue community and across the United Synagogue is that we all become, each of us as members, our leadership, our management, become ambassadors to change how we view our climate, relate to our climate, and what we do in our communities. So Eco Synagogue will be there to help you in that journey.
Thank you so much. Jonathan.
Gosh, it's a hard
It is a
question.
biggie, but go
I'm
for it.
struggling. So don't buy a new petrol car, please.
Yay.
If you can't afford an EV now, which is the case for most people, or it's not the right kind, just don't buy a new car for the moment and just wait. Second, think about a heat pump. Start planning around a heat pump. Try and get the right advice. That would be a very practical step. It's probably your largest carbon emissions in your personal life, in your family's life. And the third thing is, it's a very Jewish thing, is start learning about climate change. But don't just go on YouTube and look at all kinds of stuff. Try and find authoritative sources. I'm happy to share a few authoritative sources. In particular, I would say the IPCC reports are very good, but a bit more digestible is a website called Carbon Proof that has a lot of impartial reports. And it's a Jewish thing. The model are made to learn and teach. And everyone, you cannot be literate in today's society without knowing the basics about climate change, the basics about how we tackle climate change.
Thank you so much. I think you probably would be delighted to be connected with these people in the audience, these people online. So reach out, find out more. It's another song in my head, Le Dor Vador, I am drawn to. And it takes us right back, Rabbi, to what you spoke about at the beginning, which is being entrusted. What we do now is not for us. It is for the future generations. We have a responsibility. It's a huge one. We're going big again, but actually we can play a small part. Each of us can play that small part. So let's take the opportunity. I have learnt a huge amount this evening. I just want to thank the three of you for sharing your knowledge, but mostly your enthusiasm. I'm enthused. I'm going to wake up thinking about climate change. I'm definitely going to bed thinking about climate change. And I think the conversations that we have started this evening, I am really glad to hear, and I only hope I can be a part of them as we continue. So I really, really thank you all so very much. And to our hosts, I would like to pass over to Donna.
Thank you.
Thank you from Barnet. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. So this is what we've been doing here in Barnet on the ground. The environment is something that I've been passionate about for a very long time, decades actually. 3 years ago, I stood for the Barnet Shore Council because I wanted to make a difference. And it is small steps, but here is what we've achieved so far. In November 2019, we partnered with Gift to participate in their Step Up shoe recycling scheme. It was a phenomenal success. 300 pairs of shoes were donated by our members and distributed by Gift to those in need. On Shabbat, the 8th of February 2020, just before the world went mad, our green project was officially launched in the presence of Theresa Villiers, our local MP and Minister of the Environment at the time, to coincide with and celebrate Tu B'Shvat. Our main goal was to replace the excessive amount of plastic being used and ending up in landfill. Our plastic kiddush shot glasses and tumblers were replaced by certified compostable plant-based units. These items are now collected by a commercial composting company by electric vehicle, how else? At their facility, the material decomposes in up to 180 days, leaving no toxins or residues behind. Once it's broken down, it can then be used as fertilizer. So here we have an amazing virtuous circle of a plant-based product going back into and feeding the soil. Our plastic tablecloth covers, which I hated, have been banned, saving a staggering 56 meters of plastic per month. Plastic cutlery has been replaced with wooden units. We've also invested in a full set of milky crockery and cutlery, as well as glasses, for 120 people for large catered functions, thereby avoiding the need for any disposables whatsoever. US Chesed Cooking for those in need is run from our kitchen in this very shul over there, using surplus kosher ingredients donated by local supermarkets and kosher bakeries that would otherwise have gone to waste. This is thanks to the Fair Share scheme and, of course, the dedication of our wonderful volunteers. Single-use soap pumps in all the washrooms have been replaced by refillable wall-mounted units, and even our sanitizers are not single-use, as we refill them with gel from 5-litre containers. Our paper towels are made from recycled paper. And just before Shavuot, in May 2021, in conjunction with our Shul B'nai Mitzvah program, we planted a huge star jasmine to enhance our forecourt, which was looking decidedly ungreen. The young people were taught about the importance of respecting our environment and how plants such as the star jasmine attract bees, which are so vital to our ecosystem. There is so much more work to be done, but my message to other communities is you have to start somewhere to make a difference. And it just remains for me to say thank you so much to all these amazing speakers, Rabbi David Mason, Talia Chain, Jonathan Waxman, and our moderator, Michelle James, and of course our own Rabbi. Thank you so much for sharing this fascinating evening with us. Good night.